direction for trying to find a better way to work. And, you know, we can't just say that the traditional hierarchical structure is going to be the way it continues, particularly in areas which are fast-paced, technology-orientated and subject to massive disruption. So, you know, you continually have to look at smarter ways to operate. So I think you've got to be open to some of these new things, and I think in certain areas, yes, it has application. I think they need to test it and monitor, because the alternative is, and we've seen some very public big business failures. You know, think about Blockbuster or Kodak or things like that. And then even step back a bit, you know, I don't know when it was brought in, but think about changes to workplace when they introduced flexible working hours.
No, I take your point. So it's not necessarily just making the whip crack faster.
No, it's about being smarter, more innovative, and how do they survive in this fast-changing world. That's, to me, is part of the drive of what this is about.
Bridget, Rebel Wilson's record defamation payout from Bauer Media slashed from $4.5 million to $600K by the Victoria Court of Appeal. And the previous ruling granted her a huge sum on the basis she had missed out on Hollywood roles, and it's now decided that that was just her opinion and that of a couple of people in Hollywood. Were you surprised Rebel Wilson was awarded such large damages on the basis of opinions about future earnings at the time?
To be honest, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I think you have to look at the figure of the original award of $3.9 million in the context that what she earns for a movie is probably proportionally much higher than, you know, an average employee's salary. So if she's getting $500,000 or $1 million for a movie, then you get pretty quickly to $3.9 million if you're missing out on roles. The difficulty here is how do you prove a negative? And what on appeal, what was found is that there wasn't enough evidence that she had missed out on these roles, so that she could sustain this claim for economic loss.
Yes, she may have missed out on them, but as you say, there wasn't the proof. Trolls and Kung Fu Panda 3, and the court said that there might have been a number of reasons that she wasn't chosen for the roles. Bridget Smith, thank you for joining us. Last today, joining us very quickly, producer Amelia Donovan, who co-presents Michael, RNZ's Squeaky Bum Time.
Yes, I'm very sorry about that. I do apologise yet again.
Not at all. A Football World Cup
I shall go straight home and listen to it.
Podcast. Achilles the Psychic Cat also got Russia versus Saudi Arabia right. It wasn't just Mystic Marcus the pig, as we said before. Good afternoon, Amelia.
Hello, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I guess I'm just looking at the time, and I'm sorry to have left you so little, but what can we look forward to this weekend?
Well, it is an absolutely cracking weekend coming up, Jim. Spain are playing Portugal overnight. That's probably going to be the centrepiece in terms of big name matches. The Battle of the Iberian Peninsula. Uruguay is also playing Egypt. That'll be a really interesting match. France is playing Australia, and Australia's 38-year-old midfielder Tim Cahill will look to score in his 4th successive World Cup. Iran is playing Morocco. Peru is playing Denmark. That'll be tasty. And Iceland are playing Argentina. It's going to be a great weekend, and I'm going to be very tired on Monday.
Yes, you will. And which game would you not miss of all of them?
Spain, Portugal, undoubtedly.
Spain, Portugal. Very good. Thank you, Emil. And we'll talk to Emil through the week and give him a bit more leeway as the World Cup progresses. Michael, thank you very much for joining us today. Michael Moynihan.
My very great pleasure. Nice to talk to you. And you, Leonie.
Yes. Leonie Freeman. Thanks, Leonie.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
We're back Monday.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe, ki te reo irirangi a Aotearoa. Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet. I pai ai ko te ramari. Thank God it's Friday. Tonight, MPI accused of misleading farmers on Mycoplasma bovis, withholding vital information on infected properties. The latest on the tourist tax, Kelvin Davis says visitors have to chip in to fix our creaking infrastructure. The Pacific island of Nauru clamps down again on free speech and assembly with what experts say is a cynical new law. Now, we know Auckland Council has an information leaker. Mayor Phil Goff has lost trust with at least one councillor, but is it dysfunctional? The war of words heats up again between the All Blacks and the French ahead of tomorrow's test, and more on that stunning world record set by 17-year-old Amelia Kerr, coming up after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanahu. The National Party says New Zealand's reputation as a fair destination is under threat from the government's planned tourist tax. By the end of next year, visitors could be paying up to $35 a visit, but Australia and many Pacific Island nations will be exempt. The levy will collect between $57 and $80 million in its first year, depending on the rate, which will be split between tourism infrastructure and conservation activity. National's tourism spokesperson Todd McClay says the government doesn't need to tax visitors to spend money on tourism.
We need to be very careful that New Zealand doesn't become seen as a very expensive destination. Look, we know we're a long way to travel. We know that we're a destination a lot of people want to come to. But if there is a greater cost, then there are a lot of choices in the world.
National's Todd McClay. An Auckland councillor says the whole council is being punished for the actions of one member who appears to be leaking information. Efeso Collins complained to the Ombudsman over the handling of a report into the feasibility of a downtown stadium. Councillors were able to view the report in full in the Mayor Phil Goff's office, but could only take away an edited copy. Mr Goff says the report contains sensitive commercial information and he's worried about leaks. But Mr Collins says if there are concerns about one particular councillor, that should be dealt with.
That councillor who's causing concern should be spoken to, and if the information is being leaked by that councillor shouldn't be entitled to the information. I think that's quite simple.
Efeso Collins says he's also disappointed that the existence of a letter that was sent to Phil Goff raising concerns about his leadership was leaked before the Mayor received it. The man charged with the death of a Paikakariki runner, Caroline Boyd, says he will never get behind the wheel again. Nathan James Lyon was sentenced to more than 2 years imprisonment today after pleading guilty to reckless driving causing death, reckless driving causing injury and driving while suspended. Upon release, he'll be disqualified from driving for 4 years. During the sentence at the High Court in Wellington, Justice Thomas read out some of the victim impact statements written by Mrs Boyd's family.
One of Miss Boyd's daughters spoke of your utterly reckless attitude and total disregard for the safety of other human beings, leading to one horrific moment of stupidity which changed her and her family's lives forever. She said you took away the most important person in her life.
Justice Thomas. Mrs Boyd's daughter Becky said Lyon's promise to never drive again has provided some comfort and she'll hold him to that for the rest of his life. The Privacy Commissioner has asked the Ministry for Primary Industries to correct what it's telling farmers about the Privacy Act as they deal with the Mycoplasma bovis crisis. Farmers desperate to protect their herds are frustrated at not being told the names of those with infected properties. Last week, MPI's Roger Smith told farmers the ministry was prevented from naming them due to the Privacy Act. But the Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards, says MPI can name them if it is deemed necessary to prevent the disease's spread.
I think MPI recognises that, in dealing with managing this, maybe some of these smaller issues of giving accurate information about the legal basis for their decisions, they could have handled better. So we'll work with them and try and get a clear message for farmers in the industry about, how those decisions are being made.
John Edwards does say that naming infected properties could make it more difficult to control the disease by dissuading others from coming forward. The police say frustrations over alleged corruption sparked yesterday's unrest in the capital of Papua New Guinea's Southern Highlands province. PNG's government has declared a state of emergency in the province after supporters of losing election candidates destroyed a commercial plane, the local courthouse and other buildings in Mendi. The police say it was yesterday's court decision to dismiss a petition against the provincial governor, William Poe's 2017 election win that sparked the rampage. RNZ Pacific's reporter there says the police were outnumbered and unable to stop the mob, some of them armed with high-powered weapons. Hundreds of people gathered again today, but the police believe most of them are just curious about the damage caused yesterday. It's 5:04. Sport, the All Blacks are trying to avoid being dragged back into the first Test tackle controversy after the French winger Rémi Grosso, who suffered a double facial fracture in the match, reignited the debate. Grosso told French media today he's struggling to understand how All Blacks Sam Cane and Ofa Tuangafasi escaped sanction for a tackle that fractured his skull. Ahead of tomorrow night's second Test in Wellington, stand-in All Blacks skipper Sam Whitelock says they're focusing on their own performance.
I don't read the French newspaper, so it's pretty easy for me. So, and everyone here, we probably don't read it as much as people would like. So we're just worrying about ourselves, and it's the easiest thing for us to control.
Sam Whitelock. The Warriors will be without the competition's leading try scorer David Fusitu'a for tonight's National Rugby League match against North Queensland in Townsville. Fusitu'a, who's had 15 tries already this season, suffered an ankle injury at training and is now unavailable. Captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck passed a fitness test and returns at fullback after missing last week's win over Manly. The New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko has made a solid start to the latest LPGA Tour event in Michigan, carding an opening round 3 under par 69 to be in a tie for 25th, 5 shots off the lead. And the New Zealand sailor Peter Burling and Team Brunel have won the penultimate leg of the Volvo Ocean Race from Cardiff to Sweden. Blair Tuke's Spanish boat Mapfre was second to snatch back the overall lead from Team Brunel. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life is bound to check in on the action at Field Days. Our former Auckland correspondent Todd Niall selects the mixtape before he leaves the building. There'll probably be something for the weekend involving football, and because we changed its name from Chinese gooseberry to kiwi fruit on this day in 1959, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to cultural appropriation. Listen to what they've done to your song and other hits after the news at 7.
And for an eclectic mix of music, news, interviews and anything else we can squeeze into the hour, join me for Lately. After the extended news bulletin at 10, I'll be talking current affairs, foreign affairs, politics, music and the arts. For an eye on the world, Lately with Karen Hay, 10 to 11, weeknights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Waikato, Waitomo and Taranaki. A few showers or drizzle patches with possible thunderstorms from coastal Waikato southwards. Tomorrow, a band of rain spreading from the north in the late afternoon or evening with possible thunderstorms. Taumaranui to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Cloudy periods with patchy drizzle or showers at times, especially in the west. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine, but a few showers near the Tararuas. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, areas of low cloud or fog morning and evening with a few brief showers, becoming mainly fine tomorrow with high cloud. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with possible thunderstorms about Bulla, and for the Chatham Islands, a few showers or drizzle developing this evening. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Alex Perrottet here in for John Campbell. Great to join you this evening. Starting with New Zealand's biggest export earner. Now the government wants hundreds of thousands of international visitors to pay up to $35 each before they come here. Labor campaigned on introducing an international visitor levy to raise money to spend on tourism infrastructure to pay for amenities and tourist hotspots around the country. And as RNZ reported a few weeks ago, Australians and several Pacific Island countries will be exempt, meaning at least 1.5 million visitors won't be required to cough up. Now today, the Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis has unveiled details about the tourist tax as well as a new online authority that will screen some travellers before they're allowed into New Zealand. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The spectacular scenery, range of attractions and the opportunities for outdoor adventure lure millions of tourists to New Zealand each year, and that's only expected to increase, with just over 5 million visitors a year expected within 6 years. But while tourism is worth more than $14 billion to the economy, there's still a downside to New Zealand's success. The Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis says infrastructure is creaking.
And we believe that visitors who use that infrastructure should also have to contribute to the cost of building, maintaining that infrastructure.
Mr Davis says he's been advised the effect on tourism numbers would be minimal.
If there's a couple of thousand fewer, we're still going to collect in the vicinity of $60 to $80 million.
The Mackenzie district, encompassing Lake Tekupo and Mount Cook Village, is a tourist mecca, but the district's Mayor Graham Smith says the proposed new tax is totally inadequate.
We are committed to giving our tourists a great experience here. They can look at the stars. We've got gold star status as far as the night sky is concerned. We've got a wonderful opportunity to do so much, but it needs to be funded, and our tourists need to fund it.
Canadian tourists Paul and Darlene, who were visiting Murchison today, said they wouldn't be put off by a tourist tax. Darlene says border taxes are just part of visiting a foreign country.
Yes, I think we would have.
Why is that?
We've always wanted to come here, and yeah, it's a once-in-a-lifetime trip.
Her husband Paul agrees, but would like to see Commonwealth countries united on waiving the entry tax.
Yeah, we would still pay that.
Are you surprised it doesn't exist?
Yeah, we've travelled a fair number of places in the world, and many have visa charges to get into the country, but most Commonwealth countries don't.
This tourist in Dunedin agrees the tax won't put people off.
It's not a big deal. Maybe it doesn't matter, only $35. Yes, because it's a long travel.
Money raised from the tax would also go towards conservation activity. The Minister Eugenie Sage says more is needed for the upkeep of dock huts and tracks, as well as other amenities.
Rangers at Punakaiki, Pancake Rocks on the west coast. One of those rangers spends most of his day cleaning the toilets because of the increased visitation there.
The tax would be paid through the existing visa system, so anyone paying for a visitor's visa would pay the tax at the same time. People coming from countries that don't need a visa would have to use a new electronic travel authority system. As well as a way to pay the tax, the ETA would also be used to screen passengers. Paul Stocks from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says the online application form will require personal details, including criminal records.
At the moment, if you're from a visa waiver country, essentially when you turn up at the airport, your name goes into the system and we know you're coming to New Zealand. And that's the first point of we have advanced passenger information. Under the new process, you log onto a website, you will say that you want to come to New Zealand, we know you're coming, and if you're somebody we don't want, you won't be coming, and at that point you'll also pay your IVL.
The head of tourism industry Aotearoa, Chris Roberts, says most short-haul passengers won't be hit, and it shouldn't deter those paying for more expensive longer-haul tickets. He says the main point is where the money will be spent.
International visitors are already paying their way, making a fantastic contribution. They're now going to be asked to pay a bit more. The key is to make sure that money goes to where it's really needed.
But National's tourism spokesperson Todd McClay says the government doesn't need to tax visitors to spend more money on tourism.
We need to be very careful that New Zealand doesn't become seen as a very expensive destination. Look, we know we're a long way to travel. We know that we're a destination a lot of people want to come to. But if there is a greater cost, then there are a lot of choices in the world.
The government plans to have the new tax in place by the second half of next year, following a period of public consultation. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The Ministry for Primary Industries is being accused of handing out misleading information to farmers at a Mycoplasma bovis meeting. It revolves around the Privacy Act and farmers' frustrations at not being told the names of those with infected properties. Last week, MPI's Roger Smith told 200 North Canterbury farmers that the agency was prevented from naming them due to the Privacy Act, and doing so could result in it being charged. But today, the Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards, said these statements were incorrect and farmers had been misled about what the law said on it. Conan Young, who's been working on an inside investigation into M. bovis, has more.
The comments from MPI's head of biosecurity, Roger Smith, were at a meeting in Cheviot, one of a number MPI are holding around the country to keep farmers informed about the effort to eradicate M. bovis. Mr Smith said MPI was as frustrated as the farmers were about the limitations imposed on it by the Privacy Act.
And if you've ever listened to the new Minister of Agriculture, Tim O'Connor, he has said it virtually word for word, your comments. This is just bloody stupid, is his view of it. I've had 3 legal opinions, including from the Privacy Commissioner, who says that if we name a farmer, we're in a serious breach and therefore we'll be charged with an offence.
Roger Smith gave the farmers this advice if they were not happy with the Privacy Act.
I know you might think the law is stupid. The opportunity to change that law is to work with your local MP. Unfortunately, it's not an MPI law, it's a national law for this country. So we have no control over that, but I said I had 3 legal opinions, including the Privacy Commissioner, which has said is that our hands are bound.
The Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards, says these statements are incorrect and farmers have been misled by MPI about what the law says on this.
The most charitable construction I could put on that excerpt is that he's just got completely the wrong end of the stick. We have not given a legal opinion to that effect. There is no possibility of being charged in terms of a Privacy Act breach. As I say, the law that applies in relation to this matter is primarily the Biosecurity Act.
John Edwards says he's been in contact with MPI and is now working on amending what it says to farmers around the Privacy Act to ensure they are being given accurate information.
I expect, and I think farmers should expect, that the range of responses is driven by science and prudent management of this issue, not by, it shouldn't be driven by misinterpretations of legal obligations.
The Privacy Commissioner says in some circumstances, MPI does have the power to name those with infected properties, but it needs to have a good reason why, and this must be necessary in helping to control the spread of M. bovis.
We could say every day in the newspaper, let's have a new list of farms that are being tested. Would that be in the interests of the industry? It's possibly going to be disproportionate. It's going to be an over-disclosure of information that doesn't serve any biosecurity need.
John Edwards says naming those with infected properties could make it more difficult to control the spread of the disease by dissuading others from coming forward for fear they might be named and shamed. You can hear more on Insight's investigation into Mycoplasma bovis and farmers' frustrations with the Privacy Act on Sunday morning. For Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Now, news just to hand, Conan Young, who brought you that report, has just been speaking with MPI's head of biosecurity, Roger Smith. Now, Roger Smith told Conan Young he apologised for misleading the farmers.
What we've actually said and what we're doing is correct. That the issue is that there's the Biosecurity Act and the Privacy Act. And I guess in my attempts to simplify down our reasoning to make, for the Cheviot Hotel, we try not to take lawyers with us to these events. I'm not a lawyer. I try and make it so it's easy to understand, and it's really around privacy concerns. So our position still is that we will not name, and I can go through the reasons for that. And yes, the Biosecurity Act does allow us to make that information available where it serves a particular purpose, and that doesn't outweigh doesn't outweigh the privacy concerns. So yeah, I was probably using language in the Cheviot Hotel that if I was a lawyer, I might have been more careful, but I was trying to get across the situation as it is on the ground.
How widespread is this message that you were giving to the farmers at the Cheviot Hotel last week? I mean, how many other meetings has this message been repeated at?
Well, our message has been consistent across the country, to be fair, that we would not name farmers and due to privacy concerns. But
this line that you gave to the farmers at the Cheviot Hotel last week, where you said the Privacy Act, you'd had legal opinion that said the Privacy Act prevented you from naming farmers. How many meetings have you trotted out that line at prior to that and since then?
Well, it was my understanding of that's how it read, my reading of the legal advice I had, and obviously I'm wrong with that. I know I rounded it out once to another regional council type meeting, so at least Cheviot and one other, at least. But we do a lot of meetings, and it depends on the questions asked from the floor. But I said I have been consistent in the messaging that we would not release information.
So would you admit that you weren't necessarily across the legal opinion at the time you were telling farmers this about the Privacy Act?
What I would say is that I had received legal advice for nearly 11 months that I couldn't release the information around for privacy reasons. Now, whether and privacy reasons and then Biosecurity Act and Privacy Act, two different acts, I could have dug deeper into that, but I take my legal advice. I said, not being a lawyer, I take the advice of our lawyers, and so I said I apologise if that's come across the wrong way.
That's MPI's head of biosecurity, Roger Smith, speaking to Conan Young just a few minutes ago. Now, the father of a young man who drowned after walking out of the mental health unit at Waikato Hospital unsupervised says his care was a train wreck waiting to happen. Nicky Stevens, who was 21 and suffered from schizophrenia, died in the Waikato River in March 2015. His inquest ended in Hamilton today, and our reporter Andrew McRae has been there.
Nicky Stevens' father, Dave McPherson, told the inquest the family had been closely involved in the various stages of his son's care, and they thought he was in the best place to receive treatment. However, Mr McPherson says, sadly, the family's experience with Waikato DHB's mental health services removed all trust they once had in the system. He told the coroner that granting of unescorted leave placed his son in danger, especially as he had tried to kill himself at least once. Mr McPherson says clinicians ignored the family's request for only escorted leave breaks.
The hospital has an absolute duty of care to see that he does not come to harm, and letting him out unescorted at this time is a total abrogation of that duty of care.
He says red flags about care at the hospital were raised when his son had earlier tried to take his own life.
When we found out Nicky had been admitted to hospital with a serious suicide attempt requiring urgent surgery that took 5 hours, we were told, having all of that happen and us not hearing about any of it for 3 days.
Mr McPherson told the coroner the family went to the police to lay a complaint because they felt the DHB had handled the situation badly. The police considered provisions in the Crimes Act around culpable homicide, but they didn't pursue it further. Mr McPherson says they only ever wanted the DHB held responsible, not any individual clinicians.
We were very unhappy about some of the decisions by individual staff members. They'd been badly wrong, but more importantly, we felt it was a DHB responsibility.
A hospital psychiatrist who was Nicky Stevens' lead carer in the days leading up to his death earlier told the inquest that Mr Stevens had told staff he didn't want his parents involved in discussions around his care. Nicky's mother, Jane Stevens, who was back in the witness box today, disputes this. She says while Nicky, after trying to kill himself, had told emergency department staff that he wanted to tell his parents first about what had happened. At no other stage did he want them excluded from decisions around his care.
What I have experienced is that seems to have continued through, at least in the conversation with clinicians, that therefore meant that Nicky didn't want us involved. I have reviewed the clinical notes and there are more comments about Nicky's engagement with his family, about him wanting to involve his family.
Jane Stevens says both the whānau and clinicians all had her son's best interests at heart, but they both had different opinions on how it was to be achieved. She says what she wants to come out of the tragedy is a much stronger collaborative relationship between clinicians and families of mental health patients.
There wasn't that collaborative relationship, even though it existed within DHB policy at the time. On the ground, it wasn't operating, and certainly some of the recommendations that I've made to the coroner address those issues. We want to see things go forward in a positive way.
The inquest is now ended and Coroner Wallace Bain has reserved his decision. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae Tēnei.
And if you do have concerns about that or you do want help, of course, Lifeline is always there on the phone. You can call them 24/7, 0800 Lifeline. You can also text HELP immediately from your phone if you'd like to speak to someone about those issues. It's right on 5:23. Insulting. That's how one of the Auckland councillors has described the conditions imposed on them around the release of a council report into the feasibility of a downtown stadium. Efeso Collins ended up complaining to the Ombudsman about it, and yesterday a formal investigation was announced. But the Mayor, Phil Goff, is standing by his actions, saying it's clear someone is leaking information. Sarah Robson has the story.
Manukau representative Efeso Collins is one of the councillors who's complained to the Ombudsman about the Mayor's handling of the downtown stadium report. He is also one of 9 councillors who signed the letter that was given to the Mayor Phil Goff earlier this week, raising concerns about his leadership. One of their main problems, Mr Collins says, is the fact councillors were only able to access a full copy of the stadium report in the Mayor's office.
So I find it borderline insulting for someone my age being told, here, you can have a report and now can you give it back?
Phil Goff told Morning Report that he stands by that action, given the document contains commercially sensitive information. While he trusts most councillors, he says he's concerned about one in particular.
At least one of those councillors leaked that letter and has leaked regularly other material that has been given. That's on record.
But Efeso Collins says the rest of the council shouldn't be punished for the actions of one councillor.
My background's in education. This is like punishing the entire classroom because you've got one naughty child in the class. That's not how you approach education. And it shouldn't be how we approach mature elected councillors of Auckland Council.
In an ironic twist, the existence of the letter to Phil Goff, outlining concerns about his handling of the report and his leadership, was leaked to media before the Mayor had even seen it. Efeso Collins admits that's not a good look.
Of course, that's hugely disappointing for me, and the very reason that Phil Goff was probably holding back on the stadium's report was because he didn't want it leaked, and then this happens to us.
Regardless, Efeso Collins says the councillors who signed the letter are worried about the way council meetings in particular are being run.
If you look at who signed that letter, I am at political odds philosophically with a number of people who've signed that letter. So this isn't about a group of people who just suddenly decided to sign a letter. This is about a group of people who have felt like they've been belittled, where their voices haven't been heard.
Efeso Collins says there's a sense that some councillors have greater access to the Mayor, and that's not necessarily based on ability. One of the 10 councillors who didn't sign the letter, Penny Hulse, says the ongoing issues are a bit of a distraction.
The original handling of the report was a bit average, but I think this is just now getting a little bit ridiculous. It's going on, and for those of us who are pretty busy and have huge workloads, to be honest, it's a bit of a sideshow.
Another councillor who didn't sign, Chris Darby, says those who did could have taken a different approach.
Probably would have been much more appropriate to knock on the door, because I found Phil to be extremely open.
So is the Auckland Council dysfunctional? Efeso Collins doesn't think so.
No way, it's not dysfunctional at all.
And Phil Goff doesn't think so either.
On the big issues, the council team has worked together. It's been very effective. But, council's like Parliament. It's like any group of people who are elected. There are 21 different opinions there. From time to time we disagree. That's part of democracy.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Just coming up to 27 minutes past 5 to rugby now, where the All Blacks are in Wellington preparing for their second test against France tomorrow. It's the skull fracture, though, suffered by Remy Grosso in the first test at Eden Park last week that's reignited debate again today after All Blacks Sam Cane and Ofa Tu'ungafasi escaped punishment. Our rugby reporter Joe Porter was at the captain's run this afternoon and told me the controversy is not going away.
Yeah, well, that's right. The French have called the tactics illegal, they've called the All Blacks dirty, and they've called them cheats. And of course today, Remy Grosso, the winger who was in fact suffered the double facial fractures and was only just cleared to fly back to France a few days ago, has had a crack again today through the French newspapers, claiming the All Blacks used illegal tactics, that the two players, Sam Cane and Ofa Tu'ungafasi, should have been sent off, yellow carded and red carded at least. He said had they been French players wearing blue, doing the same thing, they would have been red carded or sin-binned at least. So he's therefore, again, making a reference to the unfairness that the French believe they've suffered at the hands of the referees so far on this tour.
Now, in terms of the lineup for tomorrow's game, Joe, we're likely to see the same roster for the All Blacks, but there will be changes for the French. Is that right?
That's right, an unchanged All Blacks lineup as the coach Steve Hansen seeks to maintain that winning momentum they built over the second half of last week's impressive performance at Eden Park. The French, on the other hand, not happy with their first up effort. They've got a lot of their top guys back from the top 14 French competition this week, so they'll be bringing a lot of fresh excitement and energy to the squad, and it will be a better French team we see this weekend. A lot of fire in the bellies of the French too. We know what happened to Remy Grosso last week. They won't say it publicly, but they're fuming and they really want to get one back over the All Blacks. They are not happy about it at all. So it should be a very tense affair here at Westpac Stadium. I still think the All Blacks will be a little too strong for this French side, and I think in the last 20 minutes we might see the All Blacks pull away once again and maybe put another 20 points on the French this weekend.
So you're saying it could be a closer game, but the All Blacks could still pull away at the end. You've been pretty good on this in the past, I remember last year, in predicting the scores. Will you have a bit of a wager this time?
Yeah, well, look, the French did really well for the first 50 minutes last week. Of course, they were leading 11-8 and with 50 minutes gone through the game. It wasn't until the last half of the second half the All Blacks really pulled away. This week, the All Blacks will come out firing. Steve Hansen wants a much better performance from the first whistle, so I think you'll see a better first half performance from the All Blacks, which will then set them up to again pull away in that second half. And I think the All Blacks will put at least 20 points on the French this weekend. I'm picking a scoreline of around 35-10, 35-15.
That's our rugby reporter, Joe Porter. Certainly looking forward to that game between the French and the All Blacks, Test number 2 at Westpac Stadium tomorrow night. Coming up on Checkpoint, commemorations mark 1 year since the Grenfell Tower tragedy killed 72 people. The Pacific island of Nauru clamps down again on free speech and assembly with what experts say is a cynical new law. Mount Ruapehu gets a gondola. Of course, we would love your feedback on the stories we've had tonight. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us, we're at Checkpoint RNZ, as well as Facebook, Checkpoint with John Campbell, and of course there's email as well, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Do get in touch, we always love the feedback. First, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The Ministry for Primary Industries has apologised for misleading farmers about the Privacy Act on naming properties infected with Mycoplasma bovis. The head of biosecurity, Roger Smith, says MPI's position is that it will not name owners of properties with M. bovis. He says if he were a lawyer, he might have been a bit more careful when talking to farmers at the Cheviot Hotel last week. National says we need to be careful New Zealand doesn't get a reputation as a very expensive destination. By the end of next year, visitors to the country could be paying up to $35 to come here. The levy will collect $57 to $80 million in its first year to be split between tourism infrastructure and conservation activity. An Auckland councillor says he's disappointed the existence of a letter sent to Phil Goff raising concerns about his leadership was leaked before the mayor received it. Efeso Collins says the whole council is being punished for the actions of one member who appears to be leaking information. He says that councillor should be spoken to, and if they are responsible, they shouldn't be entitled to the information. The daughter of Paikakariki runner Caroline Boyd, who was killed by a car, says a vow from the man charged with her death to never get behind the wheel of a car again is some comfort. Nathan James Lyon was sentenced to more than 2 years imprisonment today after pleading guilty to reckless driving causing death, reckless driving causing injury and driving while suspended. Once released, he'll be disqualified from driving for 4 years. The police in Papua New Guinea say frustrations over alleged corruption sparked yesterday's rampage in the capital of Papua New Guinea's Southern Highlands province. PNG's government has declared a state of emergency in the province after supporters of losing election candidates destroyed a commercial plane, the local courthouse and other buildings in Mendi. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks very much, Katrina. Getting back into it, we're talking business with Patrick O'Mara from our Wellington studio. Good evening to you.
Hi, Alex.
Manufacturing activity dipped last month and hiring intentions also came off the boil. So is there some cause for concern on the state of the economy?
Well, yeah, at one level, yes, and at one level, no. Manufacturing activity did drop to 54.5. It came off a 2-year high, so it was down 4 points for the month. Look, all subgroups actually fell, but at 54.5, it's still above 50, and 50 is the point where manufacturing activity is still expanding. So you're still seeing some growth there in the sector. But I think possibly where there was some concern was with the employment one. Now that fell below 50, which indicates that, or implies that firms are now considering not hiring, or they're stopping hiring. And while it's only 1 month's data, and it does tend to be very volatile, I think the concern is that given that we've already seen a bit of business gloominess around confidence in the government's direction, whether this will be self-fulfilling. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see over the next few months to see whether hiring intentions actually turns into actual intentions and they do stop hiring people.
Now, Patrick, there's been a lot of talk about the effects of climate change. We've had the zero carbon bill launched by the government, and Simon Bridges seems to be on board with it. But a survey of business leaders showed it didn't rate very high.
Yeah, indeed, Alex. In fact, it was very interesting that you should raise that, because we did have the Business New Zealand Sustainable Council come out and also endorse that view by Simon Bridges for a bipartisan approach to climate change. But this survey that was done by the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand of 500 business leaders found that of the big mega trends, of which climate change was one, it ranked very low. Only 7% rated it very highly. What came out on top was actually technology change and behind that was the ageing population. And I guess at one level we can actually, it does make a bit of sense. For firms, they're looking at their day-to-day operations and they're looking where they're going. Things such as technology offers both threats and opportunities. The threats around things such as artificial intelligence and robotics, even 3D printing, they'll be wondering, will that challenge my ability to make money in the future? But obviously it offers an opportunity too to be able to cut costs and as well as look at their ability to scale up employees to do this work. The ageing population, again, makes a lot of sense. With your workforce getting that little bit older, where are the workers of the future? On the other hand, as you point out, climate change, it's a very big issue. Why did it rank so low? And I guess it possibly is because the effects may be seen as indirect. They may see it as a government issue rather than necessarily one for themselves. But let's look out there. We've seen some much more intense weather. We've seen the effects of that on agriculture, and particularly in a country like New Zealand, which is heavily reliant on agricultural products, you would consider that to be a concern. You look at the disruption this weather can cost business and communities. So you do think that perhaps, if not now, then certainly in the near future, maybe it should rank a little bit higher.
Yes, I guess it's what they say when they talk about business ethics just being good for business. Maybe people need to be convinced that being more sustainable is just going to be good for business. How are those markets looking?
Well, look, it cracked 9,000, and it was actually something that Giles Beckford, our business editor, had mused about at the beginning of the week. One of those rare times when actually it's proved that he is prescient, and in fact that did actually hit that 9,000 mark. It closed up a whole 30 points to 9,009, and to see the week out. And just looking at the dollar, it's come off the boil against the US slightly, 69.5, up slightly against the Australian at 93.1, pretty much unchanged, 52.5 pence if you happen to be travelling to the UK.
Hey, thanks, Patrick. Patrick O'Mara there, our economics correspondent on the business desk tonight. At 24 minutes, or just coming up to 23 minutes to 6, the driver who hit and killed Paikakariki runner Carolyn Boyd says he will never get behind the wheel again. Nathan James Lyon has been sentenced to more than 2 years in prison after pleading guilty to reckless driving causing death, reckless driving causing injury, and driving while suspended. He's also been disqualified from driving for 4 years once he's released from jail. Our reporter Katie Doyle was in the High Court in Wellington and filed this report.
On the morning of the 19th of March last year, Carolyn Boyd had gone out for a run around the sleepy back streets of Paikakariki, north of Wellington, when she was struck by Mr. Lyon's car. Justice Thomas said Nathan Lyon deliberately allowed his car to drift as a way of showing off to his stepdaughter, who was in the passenger seat. But while he was drifting, the car skidded onto some loose gravel, causing him to lose control and plough directly into Mrs. Boyd. The Crown Prosecutor, Dale LaHood, said Mr. Lyon knew the road well.
He was no doubt driving at high speed, not just that day, but the day prior on the same stretch of road, and before this event occurred, about 15 minutes beforehand, again on the same stretch of road. He was disqualified from driving at the time. He has a very poor history indeed.
Before handing down the sentence, Justice Thomas read out some of the victim impact statements submitted by members of Carolyn Boyd's family.
Miss Boyd's husband says they have been together for the last 35 years. His wife was the heart and soul of their family, as well as the extended family and many close friends. One of Miss Boyd's daughters spoke of your utterly reckless attitude and total disregard for the safety of other human beings, leading to one horrific moment of stupidity which changed her and her family's lives forever.
In sentencing Mr. Lyon, Justice Thomas acknowledged that Mr. Lyon had shown genuine remorse for his actions, relaying statements he had made to the author of the pre-trial report.
You said to the writer, you could never be sorry enough for the family of Miss Boyd. You will never forget what you have done, and you have now learnt what is important in life. You said you wanted to write a letter to the family, but the police told you not to make contact. You also said you are concerned about the impact your offending has had on your own family.
Justice Thomas said she believed Mr. Lyon was a caring family man, whose difficult upbringing, which saw him spend a period of time in state care, had probably contributed to his irresponsible behaviour. She said his willingness to participate in restorative justice indicated a willingness to change his ways. Both families wept as Nathan Lyon was sentenced to 2 years and 4 months in jail. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
We'll move over Queenstown and Rotorua. Mount Ruapehu is getting a gondola too, with the help of a $10 million government loan. The government is lending the money from its Provincial Growth Fund, with the rest coming from local government and investors, along with the operator Ruapehu Alpine Lifts. Once constructed at the Whakapapa ski area, it will bring in an estimated 500,000 additional tourists, they say, by 2025. The government says it could transform the central North Island, but some residents are concerned about the possible strain to existing infrastructure as well as the environment. Emma Hatton reports.
Construction on the $25 million project is set to begin in November. It's expected to create an estimated 550 jobs in both its construction and associated activities. And once finished, it will transport up to 2,400 passengers per hour. It's all part of a broader plan to boost visitor numbers to the Ruapehu and Taupo districts. Owner of Skotal Alpine Lodge in Whakapapa Village, John Strevens, says it will be good for his business, as he expects it will result in a steady stream of visitors throughout the year.
Take months like April and May, we're pretty quiet then, but if there's a gondola in operation, it provides a reason for people to come to Ruapehu, and we will actually do a lot better in the times when we might otherwise been a bit quiet.
However, John Strevens is concerned about the area's infrastructure not being able to support the influx.
For things like toilets and landscaping and roads, it needs national support. Small places like us really can't cope with hordes of visitors who come and go and actually are not paying rates and not contributing all that much to the actual economy of where we are.
Ski house manager Alfresinia Jacobs says the hostel is already short of beds at this time of year.
We actually close off for the RAL staff on the mountain. And the other thing is accommodation for local people, let alone people that come in for work. They're desperate for accommodation.
Alfresinia Jacobs is also worried about the environmental impact. Ruapehu Alpine Lifts Chief Executive Ross Copeland says they've been working closely with Ngā Te Tuwharetoa and the Department of Conservation to minimise the impact on the environment. He says the gondola is expected to bring in $50 million of extra visitor spending to the region and will have a minimal impact on infrastructure.
This gondola lift provides very steady, reliable operations through the full 12 months of the year. So the intention is to attract visitors right throughout the shoulder season, and as a function of that, we're not concerned about these big infrastructure impacts or peaks.
But Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones acknowledges some infrastructure work would need to be done.
The government doesn't want to be short-sighted. It realises that this $10 million is going to expedite the growth of tourism, and associated infrastructure will be required. And if they bring suitably developed proposals to my office, they'll find this government pushing on an open door.
The clock is ticking though, with the gondola set to open in time for visitors by next winter. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
At 17 minutes to 6, we are going overseas to some international stories. We will get to London soon on what is the first anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. But first to the Pacific Islands, and the small island of Nauru is courting controversy yet again with a new law that punishes people for speaking publicly about court cases. Legal experts say the Administration of Justice Act is another assault on free speech and freedom of assembly. They say it all relates back to this week 3 years ago, when opposition MPs were arrested for taking part in a protest against their own suspension from Parliament. Following those arrests, the Nauru government deported its resident magistrate, Peter Law, and cancelled the visa of its Chief Justice, Geoffrey Eames, who then had to resign. Since then, it has drawn out legal action against the former MPs, and now it's barring them and others for speaking out about it. I spoke first to Peter Law, who says the government is seeking to punish anyone who criticises it.
Well, I was deported unlawfully in January 2014. I say unlawfully because the government ignored an injunction issued by the Chief Justice. So that was shocking in itself. But in the last 4 years, the government has taken further steps to undermine, I think, in my view, undermine the court and to really will take away people's rights, freedom of expression. So they've passed laws, for example, about censorship. It's now a criminal offence if you make a statement that may offend somebody publicly, if that's published. So these are things which are aimed at the government, of course, to stymie any criticism of the government. They've closed down what was a community Facebook arrangement where people were able to express dissent or different points of view in respect to the government. That's been closed down. They've introduced laws of unlawful assembly at
and
that
since
time.
then, just to butt in there, Peter, I mean, since then we've had some real vindictive play by the government, haven't we? We had Roland Kuhn, who was barred from travelling. He had his visa revoked and he has his family here in New Zealand. He's finally got here. I think it was almost 2 years apart from his family. A former president, Sprenta Widow, was also barred from travelling for urgent heart treatment, I think it was. So what's the latest with those MPs in this legal, I mean, it's still going on, this legal proceeding about and it's a criminal proceeding, right? So there's still a cloud over their future.
Well, that is true. The unfortunate thing is that the government has taken away their rights of appeal from the Supreme Court of Nauru. Traditionally, there has been a right of appeal to the High Court in relation to criminal matters. And there had been some appeals lodged by members of the 19 people arrested in respect to sentences that were handed down. Now, that right of appeal has been taken away by the government. The government had announced they're going to replace the High Court with another appeals court, but of course 9 months have passed and nothing has happened. There's been no steps towards an appeals court. So we're looking at sort of rights of people being whittled away, and I think they are very unfortunate developments. Nauru is ostensibly a democracy, but with these rights being taken away, it really raises the question. And they're serious issues. They're serious issues that governments like New Zealand and Australia and other Pacific Forum governments should be concerned about, because they are trampling over the rights of Nauruan citizens.
Now that's Peter Lord, Nauru's former resident magistrate. He was booted out in January 2014 and he says he was physically manhandled by police on the way out. Geoffrey Eames was the Chief Justice who was off island at that time in 2014 when his visa was revoked. Now the new law also forbids people from publishing a court decision, and Geoff Eames says this is aimed at international media ahead of the Pacific Islands Forum the country is hosting in September.
It seems to me when you look at the legislation, it's really directed towards criticism, not just by locals in Nauru, but by the international media. It's part of a series of legislation that's been passed over the last few years dealing with free assembly and free speech. And it is plain to me that this legislation is really being directed to stop a group of people known as the Nauru 19 who have criminal proceedings due to start, and which proceedings will probably be running at the same time as the Pacific Forum. The Nauru government has been extremely sensitive to international criticism or to any criticism at home, and this legislation has a really quite remarkable scope. The legislation states that any member of a group which is protesting or advancing those causes, where one of the members says something which is deemed to be in contempt of court, then all of the members are jointly and severally liable for contempt of court.
And of course, Geoffrey, just to jump in there, the punishments for this are quite extreme. I think there's $10,000 in one part of the act, but also $20,000 depending on the offence, and also jail terms, right?
That's right, up to 2 years imprisonment. I think what it's designed to do is people in Nauru are being warned that if you associate with people who make a criticism of the court, which the government deems to be an attack on the administration of justice, then you're all at risk of getting arrested and charged with contempt of court carrying such significant penalties. So it's directed towards those people on Nauru at the moment, but it's also directed at the media. It contains an extraordinary scope of power to deal with the media, including the internet, where the publication, even if it's not a publication which has emanated from Nauru, if it's accessible in Nauru, then whatever may have been the intentions or motives of the person who produced the document, if Nauru deems that to be a contempt of court, then it gives itself power to deal with that international contempt of court. All it has to do is arrange for a substituted service of the proceedings, and it can go ahead in the absence of the journalists or the media concerned to respond.
Jeff, finally, what should New Zealand be doing ahead of the Pacific Islands Forum in terms of putting this on the agenda, raising concerns? We stopped the funding to the Ministry of Justice years ago under Murray McCully. What more can be done, even verbally, by New Zealand to highlight this issue and put pressure on the government of Nauru?
I think it should be simply, as much as they can, draw to the attention of the other members of the Pacific Forum that events have not changed. All you can do is keep attention and hope that the international media will not be frightened off by this sort of legislation, but will be all the more determined to give access to the people of Nauru to media reports.
Jeff Eames there, speaking to us from Melbourne in Australia. Earlier we spoke to Peter Law, who was talking to us from Canberra. Now, we must seek balance, and RNZ has again sought comment from the Nauru government, which has for years refused to talk to this organisation as well as others. At 9 minutes to 6, it's been 1 year since the deadly fire at Grenfell Tower in London killed 72 people. Today, commemorations have taken place in the United Kingdom to remember the victims. There's been vigils and a procession in London, as well as minutes of silence held all over the country. The BBC's Richard Galpin reports.
Shortly before 1 o'clock this morning, Grenfell Tower was lit up in the colour chosen by the community to represent them and what happened a year ago. The time marking the moment the fire was first reported to the emergency services. On this, the first anniversary of the fire which took so many lives, a chance for survivors, the bereaved and other members of the community to come together again in memory of those who died.
Hashim Kadir,
Syria Shukain, Nadia Shukain, Basim Shukain, Fatima Shukain, Myrna Shukain, Zainab Shukain, Mary Mendy, Khadija Say.
What is important from this day onwards is that those who we have physically lost will never, ever, ever be forgotten.
At midday, everything stopped for a period of silence. Here at Grenfell Tower, it lasted 72 seconds in memory of each of those who never made it out of the burning block of flats. This is a day evoking the most painful of memories. The children at this primary school near Grenfell Tower lost friends and a member of staff in the fire. But for the community in this area, hope lies in their expectation that there will ultimately be justice, with those responsible for the catastrophic fire being punished.
The BBC's Richard Galpin reporting. Back home, and the former Australian cricketer whose batting record was smashed by New Zealander Amelia Kerr against Ireland yesterday says the teenager has a huge future. The 17-year-old student of Tawa College hit a record 232 not out, which surpassed Belinda Clark's 21-year record of 229 not out, set back in 1997. Belinda Clark told me a little earlier she was thrilled that her record had been beaten by someone so young and with so much potential.
Well, I heard her early in the morning, yesterday morning, and I was alerted to the fact by my Twitter feed going berserk, where someone had mentioned that my record had been broken, and that then created a whole range of activity, which I then thought, oh, what's going on here? So I then looked in at the news article and was absolutely thrilled that Amelia had made a big score.
It's a pretty long stint at the top there, 21 years before that record was broken. Did you ever have the idea, perhaps, that it could be broken by someone so young?
I hadn't given it a lot of thought, to be honest. And I think the fact that it's been broken by someone so young at a point in the game where there's so much more cricket being played and the game's on the rise and there's a lot more cricket on television, I think it's just a really exciting point where, you know, it gives something for people to talk about, and it's obviously a great achievement, and her team would be very proud of her and her family, etc. So I hadn't been thinking about when's this record going to fall, because I don't think about that often, but I'm just so pleased that it's been done, whilst I'm still alive. It's great.
Yeah, but you probably wouldn't, you probably prefer someone other than a Kiwi to knock you off your perch, surely?
Yeah, probably, if I'm honest. But that's okay. We've obviously got a strong rivalry between Australia and New Zealand. But look, I think it's great that she's been able to do this, and being 17 is absolutely amazing. If you think back what I was doing at 17, it wasn't what she's been doing. So you put it into context of your own life, and you think that's some achievement, considering she's more known for her bowling.
That's
and
right.
Just promoted up the batting order because of circumstances in the team, and then took that opportunity with both hands. I just think it's a great story.
And you're probably not giving yourself enough credit there, Belinda. I mean, you're a pioneer in the field of cricket. For a long time, you were the only human being that scored a double century in the limited overs game. That's the 50-over game. With that in mind, you being such a pioneer for so long, how do you classify Amelia Kerr?
Look, I think I just think having a youthful exuberance and the ability to go out and be bold, and I understand she hit a six off the last ball to pass the score. So just that boldness is something that I really think is wonderful, and she's going to be a great player if she continues to do this. This won't be a flash in the pan. I've heard very good things about Amelia and her. The way she goes about the game, the fact that she's got her feet on the ground, she's a good team member. So, look, those things don't just happen by chance. She's obviously put in a lot of hard work, but there's probably more hard work in front of her than behind her to continue to make a difference for New Zealand cricket.
And, of course, she does all that without using any sandpaper or tape, of course, too.
Well, that's right, and nor bowling underarm, so we've got to get all those jokes out of the way quickly. Yeah.
I saw the Australian cricket team a little bit sensitive about their... The people in the field, the people in the stands over in England, this is the men's team, there was sandpaper handed out at the game, and some of them were a little bit sensitive, and I thought, well, that's a bit rich. You've got to expect a little bit of ribbing after an event like that, whether you fessed up and said sorry and cried on TV or not. But we will move on. We will move on from that. And I wanted to ask you, because you also have a lot of experience. You work with Cricket Australia, you work with young people in the game, and as you said before, it's become more professional. People are getting to the game earlier. I mean, what's the next big thing? We're seeing all sorts of records topple now. What's next? I mean, are we going to see triple centuries in this kind of game? We're going to see bigger scores in 2020 matches. I mean, what do you predict is next on the horizon in terms of young people doing so well in this game?
Oh, look, I think those things will, they'll push the boundaries, but I think the balance in the game between bat and ball is really important, and if it gets out of control where the bat's dominating too much, I think there'll be things brought in place to make sure that it's a fair and interesting game for people to play and watch. So I don't know that we'll keep the same upward trajectory we've seen in the short form game around scoring rates, but you play on a lot of different surfaces and a lot of different size grounds around the world, and as the game becomes more and more open across other countries, you're obviously going to play against teams that are relatively new. So there still will be big scores, absolutely, but I think it's really important for the sport to keep some balance between bat and ball, and I think we've got it pretty right at the moment.
Now, look, there'll be a whole lot of attention given to Amelia Kerr in the next few weeks and months, and she's got a lot of cricket to play ahead of her. What's your advice as someone who's been there before? What would you tell her in terms of how to approach her current fame and the rest of her career?
Look, I'm told that she's got her feet on the ground. She comes from a good family, so I would expect that she'll enjoy the accolades for a short period of time, and then she'll. I suggest she'd be best to place it in the back of the memory bank and think more about it when she's my age, and get on with winning games of cricket and doing her best for New Zealand. So it's a great landmark, it's a great achievement, but you don't want it to distract you from making sure that you're trying to become better every day. And from what I hear, that's her attitude, and I think she'll be fine dealing with the little spots of fame that come along the way.
Belinda Clark there, being a good sport. More to come after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The head of biosecurity for the Ministry for Primary Industries is adamant the ministry will not name farmers who have Mycoplasma bovis on their properties. But Roger Smith has apologised for misleading 200 North Canterbury farmers at a meeting last week in Cheviot. He told the farmers the Privacy Act prevented the agency from releasing a list of infected farms. Mr Smith says he was only trying to simplify the situation for the farmers.
We will not name, and I can go through the reasons for that. And yes, the Biosecurity Act does allow us to make that information available where it serves a particular purpose, and that doesn't outweigh the privacy concerns. So yeah, I was probably using language in the Cheviot Hotel that if I was a lawyer, I might have been more careful, but I was trying to get across the situation as it is on the ground.
Roger Smith of MPI. The Privacy Commissioner John Edwards says Mr Smith's claim was incorrect and misleading. The National Party says New Zealand's reputation as a fair destination is under threat from the government's planned tourist tax. By the end of next year, visitors could be paying up to $35 to visit, but Australia and many Pacific Island nations will be exempt. The levy will collect between $57 and $80 million in its first year, depending on the rate, which will be split between tourism infrastructure and conservation activity. National's tourism spokesperson Todd McClay says the government doesn't need to tax visitors to spend money on tourism. The father of a detained patient who died after he walked out of the mental health unit at Waikato Hospital unsupervised says the family bitterly regrets not taking him home to look after. Nikki Stevens, who was 21, was found drowned in the Waikato River in March 2015. Andrew McRae has been at his inquest.
Dave McPherson told the inquest the whānau thought his son would be safe in hospital, but the treatment was a train wreck waiting to happen. He says had the family ignored the compulsory order and cared for Nicky themselves, it's likely he would still be alive today. Mr McPherson says they only ever wanted the DHB held responsible, not any individual clinicians. Coroner Wallace Bain has reserved his decision. In Hamilton, ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
The police have dropped a trespass charge against a Māori land protester who's been living on his ancestral grounds next to Lake Horowhenua for the last 14 years. Philip Taueke has been fighting the charge since 2015 when he was trespassed by the Horowhenua Domain Board. His lawyer, Michael Bott, says after the case had been bounced between the District Court, the High Court and back again, the police prosecutor has finally decided it is fatally flawed. He says the Crown offered no evidence today and the charge against Mr Taueke has been dismissed. United Nations Security Council members have been unable to agree on whether to urge Saudi Arabia and the United Arab States to halt their offensive on the Yemeni port of Hodeidah to wrest it from Houthi rebels. The Saudi-led alliance of Arab states launched the air and ground attack on the port, the biggest offensive since entering the conflict 3 years ago. The port is the main supply route, bringing food to most of the country's already famished population. Sweden's UN ambassador Carl Skall says they're hoping to make some progress in the next few days.
We are extremely worried about the situation, and we call for the coalition to freeze its military action and for all parties to accept a cessation of hostilities so that these discussions can continue and that parties would come back to the table for a dialogue instead.
Sweden's UN ambassador Carl Skall. Cook Islanders have been voting as 58 candidates seek to fill the 24 seats in the local parliament. Polling booths have been busy since they opened at 9 a.m. local time. 3 political parties are contesting the elections: the ruling Cook Islands Party, led by incumbent Prime Minister Henry Puna, the Democratic Party, whose leader Tina Brown is hoping to be the country's first woman Prime Minister, and the smallest grouping One Cook Islands. Preliminary results are expected by 10 o'clock tonight local time. Businesses are hoping a new gondola at Mount Ruapehu's Whakapapa ski field will bring in more visitors during the off-season. The government announced today it will be loaning $10 million to the project through the Provincial Growth Fund. The owner of Scotel Alpine Lodge in Whakapapa Village, John Strevens, says it will be good for his business as it provides a continuity of visitors throughout the year.
Take months like April and May. We're pretty quiet then, but if there's a gondola in operation, it provides a reason for people to come to Ruapehu, and we will actually do a lot better in the times when we might otherwise been a bit quiet.
However, John Strevens says he's concerned about the strain it will put on the existing infrastructure. It's 6:05. Sport. The New Zealand Warriors prop Adam Blair says they must produce the energy they displayed earlier in the season if they're to beat the Cowboys in their National Rugby League clash in Townsville tonight. The Warriors will be without the competition's leading try scorer David Fusitua for the match, although skipper Roger Tuivasa-Sheck is back. Blair says their win over Manly last week showed glimpses of their strong early season form.
You know, we hadn't played like that for a long time, and I think we started our season off like that with the energy and the communication through the forwards. And if we can look back on performances, and our better performances are the ones where we play with a lot of energy, and that just gives confidence to the group. So it's making sure we do that better than what we did last week.
Adam Blair. The former Australian cricket captain who had her batting record broken by young New Zealand star Amelia Kerr yesterday has congratulated the White Ferns teenager on her impressive feat. Kerr belted 232 not out in the third and final ODI between New Zealand and Ireland in Dublin, going past the record of 229 held by Belinda Clark for the highest score in women's one-day international cricket. A legend of the women's game, Clark says she can't wait to catch Kerr play in person.
Congratulations, Amelia. Fantastic effort to break the record of 229. The fact you did it on a 6 makes it even a more theatrical occasion. I'd rather an Australian beat the record, but I'll take a 17-year-old Kiwi instead.
Former Australian cricket captain Belinda Clark. And the New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko is tied for 25th, 5 shots off the lead after carding an opening round 3 under par 69 at the latest LPGA Tour event in Michigan. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, who'd have thought darts could become a bazillion-dollar international sport? Barry Hearn is the man who took darts out of the pub. Former British politician Michael Portillo's career is now very much on the rails. His great railway journey programmes have taken him all over the world. And Australian author Jessie Cole's remarkable memoir about dealing with suicide. Join Nick and Hill tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow: Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Waikato, Waitomo and Taranaki. A few showers or drizzle patches with possible thunderstorms from coastal Waikato southwards. Tomorrow, a band of rain spreading from the north in the late afternoon or evening with possible thunderstorms. Taumaranui to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Cloudy periods with patchy drizzle or showers at times, especially in the west. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine but a few showers near the Tararuas. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, areas of low cloud or fog morning and evening and a few brief showers, becoming mainly fine tomorrow with high cloud. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with possible thunderstorms about Bulla. The Chatham Islands, a few showers or drizzle developing this evening. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina. Alex Perrottet here joining you. It's good to join you, and do take some comfort that John Campbell will be back next week in his comfortable seat here at Checkpoint with John Campbell. Our top story this hour: the Ministry for Primary Industries has apologised for misleading farmers about the Privacy Act and naming properties infected with Mycoplasma bovis. The head of biosecurity, Roger Smith, told a public meeting in Cheviot last week, attended by 200 farmers, that the agency was prevented from naming the infected properties due to the Privacy Act. But this afternoon he was forced to apologise after the Privacy Commissioner John Edwards said Mr Smith had got the wrong end of the stick. Mr Smith told our reporter Conan Young this afternoon he is restrained by the Act, but it's the Biosecurity Act, not the Privacy Act.
Whenever a farmer is identified, we don't say they have to go to a town hall meeting like that, but we ask them to go and talk to their neighbours and let them know what's happening and provide advice. Now, some farmers are happy to do that. We've seen that, I've said many times. In other cases, farmers decide not to. And again, my legal advice is that when they decide not to, I can't go and release that information. That is the advice I have. If the world changed and it was proven that the biosecurity outcomes would outweigh the potential risk to the individual and their families, then that would be reassessed.
Okay, and so your other advice was, well, have a look on the entryway to these properties. If there's a big yellow sign there that says this is an infected property, well, there you go. You know, we don't actually have to tell you. You can see for yourself. That's still the advice to farmers there too.
Well, just being practical to farmers, if you're driving down the road, and because you have to put the restricted place notices in a place where they can be seen at all entranceways onto a farm. So they're actually physically there, and so if you're driving down the road and you think your neighbour might be an affected property, if you drive past his front driveway and there's a large yellow sign that says it's a restricted place, I mean, you can make that assessment.
And so, look, I'll just get back to why this message was sent out to farmers around the Privacy Act, and the fact that you felt constrained by it. It was it just did it get lost in translation there, or were you not actually across it yourself?
No, look, I've received legal advice many times from lawyers about the privacy concerns. And maybe it was my, ability to understand it, but we've always talked about protecting the privacy. And normally in a session, people immediately say it's the Privacy Act, and I see it in a discussion like those town halls, to go and sit down and try and work them through all the various parts of the different acts and which one has priority over another act. To be honest, it would be even more difficult than this. So, yeah, look, I said I apologise. The outcome was the same though, and I'll talk to I had talked to the Privacy Commissioner this week. The outcome is the same, is that the current advice I've received and still in place is that we cannot release the information on individual farmers at present.
Did the Privacy Commissioner get in touch with you this morning, did he?
No, met with him earlier in the week.
Around this issue?
We had a very, very positive discussion. And to be honest, we're both on the same reasoning that we can't release the information, but we should be saying we can't release the information for privacy concerns based around the Biosecurity Act, as opposed to saying we can't release the information because of the Privacy Act.
Now, meanwhile, a Waikato farmer already facing the loss of one of his herds to Mycoplasma bovis has taken a second hit after confirmation another farm also has the disease. 2 more cases have been confirmed by the Ministry for Primary Industries, one near Hastings and another managed by Waikato farmer Hank Smith near Cambridge. Now that brings the total number of infected farms throughout the country to 38, and there's a further 73 that are under restriction place notices. As our reporter Tom Furley discovered, it's a double blow for Hank Smith.
In May, Hank Smith confirmed his farm was the first in the region to test positive for Mycoplasma bovis. He was quick to put his hand up, announcing his farm was infected at a packed public meeting in Cambridge. But last Monday, less than a month later, he got another call from an official about his other farm.
He said, your farm has gone infected. And I asked him, have you got any details? Is it on bloods? Is it on nasal? Is it on tonsil tissues? Is it on milk? And he said, I can't tell you.
He says after speaking out there were mixed reactions, but many people thanked him for making the problem a bit more understandable. At the time, the farmer of 33 years told Checkpoint the disease would likely put him out of farming altogether. With the second farm now confirmed, he says he's got other irons in the fire.
I've got a very nice herd of cows that I put together with a lot of passion,
and breed with them some really good animals. And I just don't want to start over again, you know, so I'm out.
The Rural Support Trust is in contact with Mr Smith and all farmers affected by the disease. Its chair, Neil Baitup, says new cases come as no surprise, but the spread is leaving farmers pondering their future whilst also revisiting their biosecurity procedures.
There's some real nervousness around, but also some sympathy for those people who have been caught through no fault of their own in a situation that's not very pleasant for them.
Neil Baitup says publicly naming isn't necessarily in everyone's best interests, with some put under further stress.
Certainly is some stigma, and you know, children are being picked on at school and that sort of thing. And I'm really, really disappointed that is happening, because, as I said, all of those farmers have got caught up in a situation through no fault of their own.
Hank Smith says he's yet to have any decision on compensation or a program to cull his herd.
I would expect, really, with the situation that I'm in, for someone with some form of authority to come and sit around the kitchen table with me, you know, and discuss and make some plans and how to go about things. But no, that won't never happen, I think.
Hank Smith says so far he's been able to continue running his farm and milk his cows. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
And just a reminder, you can hear more about Mycoplasma bovis and farmers' frustrations on Insight. That's on Sunday morning. You might be thinking, oh, you know, I have heard enough about M. bovis, but Insight does a great job. It's an in-depth look. Conan Young has been all over the story. So we encourage you to tune into Wallace on Sunday morning and hear more about that ongoing story and hear more from farmers. At 6:15, the US Department of Justice has described the former FBI Director James Comey as insubordinate, but not biased in his handling of a probe into emails sent by Hillary Clinton from a private server. A report on the FBI's actions before the 2016 presidential election said Mr. Comey had made an error of judgment in announcing shortly before the vote that he was reopening an investigation into Mrs. Clinton's emails. The BBC's Nick Bryant reports.
Hillary Clinton believes the FBI's handling of the email investigation cost her the presidency. Donald Trump believes the FBI failed to prosecute her because it was politically biased against him. And both believe that the former FBI Director James Comey, fired by Trump, castigated by Clinton, was out to get them.
Will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help God.
The Internal Justice Department report says he made a serious error of judgment by making public statements about the Clinton email investigation, but found no evidence he'd set out to influence the election. We did not find that these decisions were the result of political bias on Comey's part, the report reads, but it also concluded that he departed clearly and dramatically from FBI and department norms. The report has also revealed a text exchange between two FBI agents already accused by the White House of pro-Hillary bias. It spoke of stopping Trump from becoming president. That's been seized upon by the White House.
It reaffirmed the president's suspicions about Comey's conduct and the political bias among some of the members of the FBI.
Back in 2015, Comey announced an investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server during her years as Secretary of State.
I made a mistake using a private email.
For Donald Trump, it was the political gift that kept on giving.
Let's knock out crooked Hillary Clinton. Crooked is a $3 bill.
Comey announced the FBI was not recommending charges against Hillary Clinton. Then, just weeks before polling day, Comey controversially reopened the investigation. More emails had been uncovered.
It's pretty strange to put something like that out with such little information right before an election.
In a final twist, just 2 days before polling, Comey again recommended that no charges should be brought. But Democrats claim the damage had already been done and that Comey's interventions helped win Donald Trump the White House.
It was Trump who benefited from all these mistakes, so it hardly reflects deep state or bias against him.
In a separate development, the Trump Foundation is being sued by the New York Attorney General, who's accused the president of persistent illegal conduct at his charitable body that went on for more than a decade. He's slammed that legal action as politically motivated and ridiculous.
The BBC's Nick Bryant reporting there. A second hard winter is on its way for some Kaikoura businesses. After a summer season interrupted by cyclones and other wild weather, the main route into the town only reopened last December after being shut for more than a year in the wake of the magnitude 7.8 earthquake in 2016. Thousands of tourists flocked to the town until Cyclone Gita hit in February, closing the route once again. Now, some Kaikoura businesses are facing another tough winter, and some are wondering how they'll keep their doors open. Logan Church reports from Kaikoura.
Karen Barwick's cafe and ice cream bar, Poppy's, serves up homemade ice cream and home-cooked meals. But after a stop-start summer, Karen is wondering how she will keep the doors to her business near State Highway 1 open.
We've had to diversify a lot. We've had to do very long hours just to stay open, and we've done that. But now that winter's here, ouch, I don't know how we're going to survive the next 2 or 3 months.
Just this week, heavy rain and a blocked drain flooded out at least one shop. Wild weather and seismic events are now a part of everyday life in Kaikoura. And even though locals are trying to remain positive, Karen Barwick says it's taking a toll on businesses.
It's just one day at a time still at the moment. And like that for a lot of us. I mean, a lot of businesses just shut down. We don't want to do that, but it may come to that. We'll just shut down and pay rent and pay our power and save money elsewhere. But you just have to do what you have to do.
Megan May, who owns Wildflower Botanicals, had to lease part of her shop space last year just to keep afloat. Heading into winter this year, she says she still takes each day as it comes.
Winter's never good here. Everything slows down. People have to always put things away to get through, and a lot of businesses just have to close down because they can't afford to open during the winter. So I think I'm just taking each day as it comes. I figure I'd turn up and see what happens.
Penny Betts owns Gecko Gears and had opened a second store over summer to serve the torrent of tourists that travelled State Highway 1 after it reopened in December last year. Up to 5,500 vehicles used the route daily. She plans to close over winter as the tourist trade dries up and take a break for the first time since the quakes.
And I'm just going to close down for a time, take some time out, try and sort out some other stuff that's, sitting around to do. We need to go away and go and have a holiday, have a family holiday, recharge the batteries, and when we come back we'll just be, hit the ground running, basically getting ready anyway for summer.
Kaikoura's Mayor, Winston Gray, says bad weather can cause serious problems for the tourist-dependent seaside town, but he's confident there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I mean the last couple of weeks it's been wet and we've had the Gita, we had road issues. It's not a big impediment, but we've had the road closed probably a couple of nights this week, so that probably doesn't help a lot.
Kaikoura businesses are now keeping their fingers crossed and hoping State Highway 1 can remain open while they wait out the rest of winter. In Kaikoura for Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tēnei.
And if you are just listening in on the radio, a bit of a heads up, I do encourage you to go to the website later on tonight or later on and just watch that video program, a video report from Logan Church down there in Kaikoura, some great footage shared there. It's 22 minutes past 6, and we do have a bit of feedback from some of our listeners and viewers. Paul's got in touch about the tourism tax. He says the government collects billions of dollars from tourism via GST and tax on other tourist industry profits already. There's no need for another tax, Paul says. We should just distribute the GST revenue more equitably. How much of the new tax, he asks, will evaporate in administration costs? He also says how many tourists will choose an alternative destination because of the extra hassle involving the new electronic travel authority. There may be concerns about that. He says most travellers go for broke. The new taxes take money out of the consumer loop. The $35 will be better spent many times on taxable products anyhow. That's from Paul. Thanks for getting in touch. And Peggy's been in touch as well with regards to M. Bovis. She says it's disturbing to hear that even after all these years, public servants still don't understand, she says, the provisions of the Privacy Act. It doesn't fill the rest of us with confidence in their competence in applying other aspects of laws that are relevant to their jobs. So thanks for your feedback. Always good to hear from you. 2101 is the text, there's email, there's Twitter. You know the ways to get in touch. Keep it coming in. To something lighter now, and something we're all been expecting. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and her partner Clark Gayford will be welcoming their first child any day now. Following the birth, the new parents are expected to pose for photographs outside the hospital, as well as take questions from the media. But what will it be like to grow up as the child of the Prime Minister? Katie Scotcher has a crystal ball.
Lovely to see you. You didn't doubt she'd come, didn't you? Well, I wasn't quite sure if she would survive.
At field days, it was clear that just 3 days from her due date, people were surprised to see the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern out and about. Swarms of camera crews and members of the public followed Ms Ardern around the agriculture event in Hamilton to try and catch a glimpse of her baby bump.
Prime Minister, you're heavily pregnant, you're at the field days. How are you feeling?
Heavily, it feels like a very...
I apologise. You're almost due.
Yeah, that's right.
How are you going?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Ms Ardern spent 2 hours, chamomile tea in hand, posing for selfies and strolling through stalls.
Cheers.
Thank you. A fascinated public and media has followed the Prime Minister's every move since she announced her pregnancy in January. And that's not likely to change when her baby is born. Ms Ardern is only the second leader in the world to have a child while in office. Vicha Shearer recalls the day his father David resigned as Labour leader in 2013. He was 12 when his father, David Shearer, entered Parliament as the MP for Mount Albert in 2009, and 3 years later became the leader of the Labour Party. He says he was always proud watching his dad do what he loved, but the day he resigned was tough on the teenager.
I remember I was walking home from school the day it happened, and I got a call from my mum, and she said, there's a few reporters outside the house, so maybe duck down like a neighbour's driveway and come around the back to avoid talking to them. And I remember sort of being quite annoyed, actually, just because I was thinking, well, it's my sort of home and my family and stuff, and all of a sudden there's people who are really interested in what's going on.
As soon as he got home, he went to his room, plugged in his electric guitar and played it loudly to annoy the reporters outside. Vicha Shearer says his peers were always asking about his father.
People sort of going, your dad's wrong, or the party is wrong, or something like that, and it was kind of them going, you probably think the same as your dad, so I don't like you, or something like that. And I found that a bit sort of insulting, really. It's people thinking that I am exactly who my father is, or exactly what he's sort of doing in his life, when actually I'm my own person and I've got my own sort of identity.
He has some advice for Ms Ardern's unborn child.
Don't be too offended by what people say or don't say to you or about you, considering who your parents are, because at the end of the day, every person is unique, every person is their own individual person, and so as long as you stay strong to who you are, it doesn't really matter what people may think of your parents or what they do.
Senior media lecturer at Otago University, Catherine Fowler, says the birth of Ms Ardern's child is exciting, but the global hype will be nothing like the birth of the latest royal baby. She thinks it'll be a test case for New Zealand media.
There should be space given to her to not be perfect and even to fail, or I would like to think that as an ordinary woman she can tweet about what's going wrong as well as what's going right and not be taken down by the media for that.
Clinical psychologist Catherine Gallagher says she has no doubt people will always be fascinated by the child or will want to be its friend. How the child responds to that attention will depend on how it's raised.
A lot of that comes down to family values and actually has this child been brought up to believe the hype, or have they been brought up to, actually you still have to tidy your room and you still have expectations and you still follow the rules, and I might be the Prime Minister by day, but when I come home I'm still the one telling you need to do your homework.
Ms Ardern is expected to be on maternity leave for 6 weeks, and while she is away, Winston Peters will be acting Prime Minister. Upon her return to Parliament, Mr Gayford will take over chief baby duties as a stay-at-home dad. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Scotcher tēnei.
Tidy your room, yes, I can imagine Jacinda Ardern saying that. Probably not for a wee while, though. At 27.5 minutes past 6, a 525-year-old copy of a letter by Christopher Columbus, known in his Spanish or Portuguese name as Cristóbal Colón, of course. It was mysteriously stolen from the Vatican and has been returned on Thursday after joint sleuthing by US Homeland Security agents and Holy See antiquity experts. Colette Luke from Reuters has more.
A centuries-old copy of a letter by Christopher Columbus, stolen from the Vatican, has finally been returned. After a long investigation, it was traced to the widow of a collector in Atlanta, Georgia, whose husband had purchased the letter in 2004, unaware it had been stolen. On Thursday, U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Callista Gingrich, marked its official return to the Vatican. The letter's history dates back to February 1493. While at sea on his return to Europe, Christopher Columbus penned a letter known as the Columbus Letter to Spain's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, describing what he had found on his voyage to the New World. The original was written in Spanish, but several copies in Latin were also printed, and one of those copies ended up in the Vatican Library in 1921. But sometime afterwards, no one knows when, it was switched with a forgery. An American expert identified the fake in 2010 and notified Homeland Security art investigators.
We identified at least 3 forgeries that were located in libraries, including the Vatican Library. It takes skill. Whoever was doing it was using a technique that mimicked the leaf dimensions.
The stolen letter's path is largely unclear, but authorities believe it eventually fell into the hands of infamous book thief Marino Massimo De Caro, who then sold it to a New York book dealer. Massimo is now serving a prison sentence for unrelated book theft crimes. But the letter, according to Ambassador Gingrich, is finally back with its rightful owner.
Colette Luke there from Reuters. And that's Checkpoint for this evening. Thanks for joining us on your radio, your TV, online, or however you choose to connect with us today. You can catch up, of course, on all our stories on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on our Facebook page. John Campbell's back here on Monday. From me, Alex Perrottet, and the Checkpoint team, kia pai tō wiki motunga. Have a good weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. MPI apologises to farmers for misleading them, but biosecurity head Roger Smith says they will still not divulge names of farms with M. bovis. The father of a detained patient who died after he walked unsupervised from the mental health unit at Waikato Hospital bitterly regrets not taking him home to look after. The police have dropped a trespass charge against Māori land protester Philip Taueki, who's been living on his ancestral grounds next to Lake Horowhenua for the last 14 years. The BBC reports McDonald's says it will replace plastic straws with paper ones in its UK and Ireland shops in 3 months. And the pioneering abstract artist and designer Milan Merkic, who painted the large coloured enamel windows at Te Papa, has died. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Larger than life, how I remember it, the harder I try, I can't forget it.